Welcome to the Upshot, Multi-World Disc Golf's podcast about the latest in the disc golf world. I'm the publisher, Charlie Eisenhood. Joining me is Josh Mansfield. And I have been looking forward to this show for quite some time because it was a very interesting season. And this is our Manufacturer Cup Manufacturer Review show as we look back on the season and see how did these teams that we talk so much about before the season perform during the season. And we're going to rank the teams. We're going to talk about who played well relative to expectations. Josh, this should be exciting.
Without a doubt. And I think that there were a lot of things that we just didn't expect coming into this season that fundamentally changed the landscape. It really feels almost like the NFL this season, right? Where you have your teams that you just expect to do well, and then all of a sudden the Jets are at the top of the NFC East, and you're like, hang on a minute, or AFC East, and you're just like, this does not compute in my head. It feels like the same thing in the Manufacturer Cup this season, so I'm excited to talk about it too.
So, before we dive into that, got a couple other little notes. First of all, please send us in your favorite or least favorite takes that Josh and I have had during the year. We're going to review where we were right, where we were wrong, and I know that people sometimes get emails like, I was screaming at the radio. I don't know why I said the radio, the podcast, because you said this thing. And so this is your chance to get to air your grievances. Tell us what annoyed you the most this year. And if you have something you want to give us credit for, dig into the archives and give us the credit. So upshot@ultiworld.com. Hit us up in the Discord if you're a subscriber. And we'll do a show looking back at this in a couple of weeks. So
I have to say, I want to say right now.
Yes.
I'm not taking back my Ledgestone take. And if you want to hear about it again, then send in the Ledgestone take, and I'll defend it again. But I'm not taking it back.
I'm gonna give myself credit. There was a stretch there, Josh, where I picked the winner.
Oh my gosh!
Of both the MPO and FPO for like a month straight.
It was crazy. It was crazy. It was like really. It was really close in picks, and then you did that, and it was over.
It was over. We'll review our picks on that show as well. So we'll look back at all that. So before we get into our Manufacturers Cup, Kristin Tattar posted on her Instagram, and she is getting surgery on her elbow. Now, this has been known that she was going to do this, but now there's like some actual certainty here. Going in, getting the elbow surgery. Of course, she dealt with the elbow injury during the middle of the season, had to skip some tournaments, and eventually just started playing through the pain, knowing that it wasn't going to get any worse. And it seems to me that like the knowledge, when she had that knowledge that she'd talked to doctors and they told her, it's not going to get any worse. I think that was comforting for her, because then she was able to just be like, well, okay, like when I need to full send a backhand, I'll just do it. It'll hurt, but I know I'm not going to injure myself more. And that seemed to give her a lot of confidence, coming into Worlds and then through the end of the season where she was just so incredibly impressive.
Yep. And that's what a smart approach to it as well, right? When you're not sure what it is, when you're just suffering from some pain, taking the necessary rest and going to a doctor and taking the precautions, that's just such an important step in ensuring that you don't jeopardize your future health and your ability to compete in future years, especially since in terms of athletes, Kristin is not the youngest of them, right? Like this is a serious elbow injury that could have been exacerbated by playing, could very well be the end of her career.
Yeah, so, hopefully the surgery goes smoothly, no complications, and she, in theory, should be ready to go at 100% to start the year. She has basically 3 months to recover, which for what is this is not major surgery. It's not like a Tommy John or something like that. So in theory, she should be ready to roll by the time LVC rolls around. So let's dive in. We're certainly going to be talking about Kristin in this segment. And we kind of toyed around with how do we want to talk about this. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through our individual rankings of how the various quote unquote teams did this year. And then we're going to talk about, players that finished inside the top 25 in our new composite world rankings, which we encourage you to take a look at. Pretty cool. We combine Ultra World Disc Golf's world rankings UDisc, Statmando, and PDGA into one combined ranking set. So you kind of smooth out some of the edges of each of the systems, and you get what is a relative consensus top 25. And we'll also talk about how these teams did relative to expectations at the beginning of the year and how the players did relative to their own internal expectations. So let's rock and roll. Josh, why don't you kick us off? Why don't we start in FPO, and we'll start at the bottom and go up to 1.
All right, that sounds good. At the bottom for me is got to be number 10, Prodigy. Prodigy had Heather Young, who was an exciting prospect and, I mean, a great player and easily would have been inside the top 25 had she played. But her very surprise announcement to step away from professional disc golf leaves a Prodigy team with nobody. When we get to top players, we'll review that a little bit, but nobody inside the top 25 is represented by Prodigy, and just a very, very difficult season for Prodigy on the FPO side as a result.
I mean, yeah, just like total abdication. I mean, they screwed up big time, not figuring out how to make it work with Katrina, right? Like,
Yep.
We talked about the Prodigy having a terrible offseason, and ultimately it went a lot better for them on the MPO side, and we'll get to that. But they had this, tremendous top line player and just didn't do enough to support her. I mean, I don't know what else
Coming
there is
off
to
a
say.
world championship win.
Crazy. But, they have their marketing plan the way that it is. And yeah, I mean, it's just a total, it's a ghost town. There's nothing in FPO to even talk about.
Yeah.
So let's move on. They're my bottom as well. For me, in number 9, while we have consensus, we'll just kind of go back and forth. Josh and I agree here. Number 9 in FPO is Westside. There is, I think Erica Stinchcomb is represented by Westside, but nobody in the top 25. They just really haven't signed any top players. Yeah. So there's not much to discuss here.
Those are the only two companies that do not have any top 25 representation in the composite power rankings. So naturally, the 9 and 10 mark.
Yeah. Now, if you think of Westside as sort of a extension of DD and Latitude in like the Trilogy world, then like maybe that gives it a little bit of a pass. But like as an individual brand, there's just not much going on here.
Yeah. I think the only reason I rank Prodigy below Westside is because of the disappointment of Prodigy thinking that they had Heather Young to rely on and then losing her.
They literally just have like no pro athletes on the.
It is little spoiler. It's the only company whose top player was a European.
Prodigy is?
Yep. An FPO. It's
trying to think of who it is. Wait.
Okay.
Were they on tour in the US?
Yep.
I feel like Tattar is also Latitude.
She is.
I don't know. Lina?
Leica Lorenzen.
Oh, Lorenzen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Lorenzen, 34th in power rankings. Erica Stinchcomb was 35th for Westside. So right there. But only one that had a European. Okay, that's not true. Sorry. Latitude 64 had Kristin. That should have been obvious. Everybody else. Those are the only two that have Europeans at the top in either division.
Interesting. All right. Josh, who we got at 7?
At my 7, I have Ella Hansen. Discmania. Excuse me. I have Discmania.
I didn't know Ella had branched out into her own manufacturing.
Well, she's kind of carrying the Discmania FPO flag, so I put Ella Hansen with Discmania there. We kind of talked about Discmania needing to get some FPO talent. They then signed Ella Hansen. This was 2 years ago, and Ella has been growing into form very well, but still is fairly new to the Pro Tour scene and stands by herself on the FPO side. Not quite enough to get wins for her that would elevate Discmania, so they get my... Oh, I said my 7. I should be doing my 8, huh?
Yeah, did I just skip 8? I skipped 8.
I think I skipped 8.
No, I said, who do we have at 7? Blame me.
All right, Charlie. Well, that's who I have at 7.
Nice.
Who do you have at 8? In my 8 spot, I've got MVP. I hit MVP a little bit. I feel like Sarah Hokum is like steadily, I don't know. Now I'm kind of like second guessing myself. I think the reason I probably would go 8 MVP, 7 Discmania is the trajectory. Like Sarah Hokum performed better than Ella Hansen, but they're sliding in opposite directions. While Ella Hansen is elevating her status, increasing in potential, you see the opposite from Sarah Hokum, who is kind of the leader of the MVP team. And so I give Discmania the nod above MVP.
Yeah, I think it's close. I do think it's close. I have these reversed.
Okay.
Since I just randomly skipped us ahead. I went 8 for Discmania and 7 for MVP, mostly because Madison Walker actually had kind of a sneaky good season for MVP. Okay. She's like back in the mix. I mean, she finished 24th in our composite world rankings this year.
That's fair. That is fair.
Not that she was really moving the needle in a major way, but Sarah Hokum ultimately was ranked slightly higher than Ella Hansen. You get Madison Walker in there as well. I tend to reward teams with a little more volume of quality players, even if that comes at the expense of wins or buzz. But I think you could really make an argument either way here. I just want to point out that Discmania, brilliant with the decision to sign Ella. I mean, remember they were like, they a couple years ago, they're like, we are looking to sign a promising FPO up-and-comer. And they had an application process. Uh-huh. And they come out of that with signing Ella Hansen. And then, boom, she's a top 15 player in the world. And, I think it's fairly obvious that Ella was going to be this kind of prospect. Mm-hmm. So it's not like, they struck gold with somebody who was out of nowhere.
Sure.
But at the time, she hadn't really proven herself at the pros level. But total coup for them. Huge win. Yeah. Batting above their level in some sense, given that really she's the only notable FPO player represented on their Discmania team. So quickly, just to kind of go up on top now, looking at expectations. So far, I think the expected players for all of these companies were the top finishers, so, nobody thought Sarah Hokum wasn't going to be the best player on MVP. So we're going to start to get some more interesting stuff as we move along here. So let's go to 6. Josh and I are aligned. No, we are not. Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Sorry. I lost my spot. It's Neptune. Neptune discs. Natalie Ryan. Pretty much the only player of any note that is signed by Neptune, period. And Natalie Ryan gets 2 wins this year on the Pro Tour. And the wins, we're going to start looking at teams with wins. And certainly Natalie Ryan gave Neptune a lot of bang for their buck in terms of access to, seeing their brand on video. Natalie Ryan was relevant all season long and gets the pair of wins.
Yeah. In the 5 spot, again, we are aligned. We have DGA. DGA signing Katrina Allen, getting them 3 wins. A good season. And I think one of the biggest things here is that while Katrina is able to carry a lot of weight on her own thanks to her wins, including the Throw Pink Women's Championship, the difficulty for me is that there were parts of the season where it felt like Katrina was not super relevant in the conversation, or at least as consistently as she has been. She had stretches, especially I think near the end of the season, that were pretty poor play.
Right before Throw Pink. I mean, she was just way off her game. Playing some of the worst disc golf we've seen her play. And then she snapped back into form for what we basically consider a major.
Yes. And when you're looking at a smaller company that only has the one player, coverage, relevance, discussion, it's completely dependent upon the shoulders of that person. So you can't just look at wins. You also have to look at the hard stretches, which is why I think I ding Katrina, even though DGA has the second most wins of any company, thanks to Katrina's 3 wins by herself.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, why I have her in the 5. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I mean, you could make a case to have them higher, I guess, particularly when we look at our 4 spot, which I'll get to in just a second. But I think, there's just nobody else. DGA just has Katrina. And so I do, like I said before, I think volume matters a little bit. But, if we were ranking quality of last offseason moves, DGA would be near the top.
Yeah.
Especially looking back, because we looked at DD, and of course all the buzz was around DD, but Kona didn't really work out very well. But on the other hand, Valerie Mondahano worked out great.
Yes.
So that sort of balances out a little bit, but certainly DGA, they go from being a brand with basically no notable players, period, that people aren't talking about, to suddenly being relevant in the national conversation. So that's a big win for them. But from a pure total team performance standpoint, it's really just Katrina, and she obviously played great. 3 wins is including a statistical non-major, but a major with Throw Pink is a big coup for them. So
yeah,
that brings me to 4, which is DD. We agree on this, Josh.
We do.
Valerie Mondahano, Holland Handley, Macy Vela Diaz, your representatives inside the top 25. That's correct. Kona Panis did not even make it into the top 25 of our list. Did not make it into the Tour Championship. Kind of a disaster season. And that's, you kind of look at who did we expect to be at the top of this team coming into the year? And, don't forget, Kona had a pretty good season in 2021. That's how she ended up, making this switch, getting the big bucks, getting paid. And it ends up being Valerie Mondahano who kind of carries for the team. I don't know that that's necessarily a huge surprise given the kind of performance we saw from Valerie last year, but it's still a surprise.
Oh, it definitely is. And you combine that with a strong performance from Holland Handley, I think similar to Ella Hansen, just an incredible signing with a promising player who also has a really relevant following and social media base. And when I look at this team composite for Dynamic Discs and the way that they played collectively this season, they just have to feel so good about almost all of their sightings, right?
Yes.
This team of these 3 young, talented players make up a solid core. And if Kona can right the ship and play even a shadow of what she played in 2021, DD could be a force to be reckoned with over the next couple of years.
If I made you bet money right now, I'm curious for your answer to this question. I want everybody listening to think about it too. If I made you bet money right now, do you think that Valerie Mondahano had more of an effect on disc sales for Dynamic Discs or Kona? Just sales.
Yeah. I would say, I would probably say Kona.
Agreed.
Because Kona got, and I think Kona really benefits from the Kona Ricky signed release beginning signature series discs.
Sure.
Etc.
The marketing,
right?
the marketing
that
apparatus.
Rollout, yes. It was all geared around Kona. I would be interested to say, starting in June, what are disc sales on?
Sure.
I think it's still probably Kona, but that's a much harder question for me.
Kona, at the end of the day, is still very good at being on social media.
Yes, she is.
Selling you a disc.
Yep.
And there's a reason that she gets paid a bunch and Valerie Mondahano doesn't. And that's part of it. Yep. There's an authenticity to the way that Kona just lets people see into her world online. And even when it's brutally difficult, she talks about how it's brutally difficult. So I think that there's still an argument. I mean, I have a hard time believing that they're going to get net benefit out of this over the 4 years unless Kona turns it around a little bit. But I mean, it wouldn't take much. If Kona wins a tournament next year, I mean, think about the narrative flip.
So good.
It would be insane. And they would come out with a disc and people would buy it like crazy.
Yep.
But interesting thing to think about. Okay, let's move on. Number 3, Josh, you're up first. We do not align in our top
podiums.
three.
Our podiums are completely different. We have the same 3 teams, obviously, but none of our rankings there are the same. In my number 3 spot, I have Innova. Let's just do the podium, and then we can talk about in order of by team.
Great.
Okay.
So you have
in my number 3 spot, I have Innova. Number 2, I have Discraft, and I give the win to Latitude 64 this year.
Okay. At number 3, I have Discraft. At number 2, I have Latitude 64, and at number 1, I have Innova.
Okay.
Now here's why that's controversial. Discraft and Latitude each have 6 wins this year. Innova has
majors.
1.
Yeah.
Which is a major for what it's worth. 1 major, 0 Elite Series wins. And then, of course, Discraft with Paige Pierce and Latitude with Kristin Tattar absolutely carrying for a ton of wins. And so, Josh, you go first. Why do you go with Latitude at number 1? Maybe it's an obvious thing to say, but give us the pitch.
Sure. The one other thing I'll add is I said 2 majors. Tour Championship, not a major, but we were counting kind of major Tour Championship throw pink when we were looking at significant wins.
Yes, fair.
So the reason that I go with Latitude is twofold. Number 1, Kristin, next to probably Paige, and again, we don't know this, but when I think about the season and I think about who moved discs this season, I guarantee there are more graces in this world from this year than were in the world in all years combined, thanks to Kristin Tattar.
Well, when did they come out with that disc? That's not that old, right?
It's not that old. It's only a couple years.
So it's a little bit of an overstatement there, my friend. Before they released the disc in 2021, there were no graces in the world.
It doesn't mean I'm not right.
That's true.
I was thinking it was like 2020 or 2019, but now I'm factually
to be honest,
correct.
I don't actually remember when they.
I don't either. It may be 2021, in which case maybe I just sound like a dummy. But I think so. Number 1, I really do think Kristin had that capacity to move discs. But number 2, so I made the critique of Katrina Allen and the DGA that when you have a lone flag bearer, really, that you have to have them always at the top, because slow stretches of the season mean you fall into irrelevance. Latitude 64 at no tournament this year was irrelevant, except when Kristin was hurt. She was on the podium every single year, or every single tournament. You saw her on lead card almost every single tournament, which means you are always featuring your brand, you're featuring your company, and you've got the wins to boot. Like, if you're Latitude 64 and any other company, you just have to be so thrilled at the way Kristin performed, or want someone like Kristin on your team, that she is the leader of a team that people pay the kind of money that, like, they paid for Paige, or they pay for, Ricky, because it defines your team. And I think that is the reason I give it to Latitude 64 this year.
Listen, I don't agree with, I agree with, I don't agree with anything you said. I agree with everything you said. But the problem is, let's just look at the teams, okay? Mm-hmm. Here's Latitude's top 25 representation. Kristin Tattar, undisputed number 1, undisputed player of the year, beast mode. Rebecca Cox. That's the list. Okay? You ready for Innova's? They only got 1 win. They won U.S. Women's, Haley King. Okay? Here is the list of players in the top 25 in the composite rankings. Owen Scoggins, Hannah Blomroos, Evelina Salonen, Haley King, Kat Murch, Jen Allen, Emily Beach, Rookie of the Year, Jessica Weiss, Lisa Fakis, Maria Oliva, Deanne Carey, and Juliana Korver. How many players is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12. Almost half of the top 25 is on Team Innova. Now, here's the thing. I understand the argument that's like, well, they didn't win. They didn't get enough wins to be ranked number 1. The thing is, when you have that many players who were up at the top, and they won Silver Series and other things, Yeah, Owen Scoggins won the what is that tournament called? The thing Colorado? The
Match play.
Match play, thank you. The sheer volume here makes up for the fact that they didn't get a lot of wins, because it's not like they weren't relevant. I mean, listen to the names of these players, right? We were talking about these players all season. I mean, Owen, top 4 finisher. The Europeans were incredibly relevant all year. And, you know, even when we were talking about the fact that their putting wasn't good, we're still talking about them.
Sure.
Haley, super interesting player. Kat Merch, one of the most improved players of this year. You know, you got the rookie of the year. You have tour veterans still finishing near the top of the tournaments, and Allen and Weiss and Fakis. Promising young talent, and Maria Oliva, Juliana Korver. Young talent. Juliana Korver is a young talent.
2021 Rookie of the Year, Juliana Korver.
That's a good throwback. Deanne Carey is what I was looking for there. So anyway, you get my point. I just think the sheer volume of quality players on this team, combined with this strong season from Owen Scoggins, and you got to give her credit. You know, Haley King, when she brought it this year, really brought it. I mean, she was awesome at U.S. Women's. So I think the sheer size of the team has to outweigh the monster season from Kristin. But I had Latitude at number 2.
Yeah.
I put them ahead of Discraft, even though Discraft does have more players in the top 25. They have 3. Paige Pierce, Missy Gannon, Alexis Mondahano. And you know, Missy Gannon, definitely a relevant player. Paige got 2 major wins and 4 Elite Series wins. So they have 6 total wins. Those are good results. But I still think that the size of the Innova team is just outweighs.
You know what? And that, you know, that like, I think you and I are going to have different reasons why we ranked it where we did. I think Paige only has 3 Elite Series wins. Missy got Ledgestone this year.
Oh, that's right. That's right. That's right. Thank you.
No problem. No problems. So the reason I have Discraft at number 2 is a lot of the same argument about why I put Latitude in number 1, but it also kind of adds to the fact the reason I have Innova in 3, maybe that's the better way to start for me, because I kind of did 1, 3 and then left Discraft in the middle at 2. The reason you can name all those great players, and Haley King is the only reason that they are not included in the 0 column, because she showed up and killed it at U.S. Women's. Otherwise, all these great players were not able to close the deal, even though Own played incredible all season, was near the top. Evelina had good tournaments. Henna had pushed Kristin at Worlds for half the tournament, but could not get a win except for Haley at U.S. Women's. And Haley was awesome and deserves credit for that.
Yeah, but all these players have limitations.
They do. And I understand that, you know, when you're looking at the completeness of a team and have the depth in that roster, that's great. But if we were to have a Manufacturers Cup with you send your top 2 FPO players.
Well, okay.
Right.
if you're gonna cut them off at the knees,
right. Sure. Give them 3. Give them, and I get that others get hurt by that, but you look at some of the top players, and there's a good chance that if you did a Manufacturers Cup and limited the number of players that got to play in it, that Innova may not even finish on the podium.
Here's a question.
Okay.
No, it's fair. If you're Innova and there was a Manufacturers Cup, we had a tournament where you send your best duo and they have to go out and try to beat everybody else. And then if you win, the disc golf gods give you a new disc machine.
Okay.
Who does Innova send in FPO? You only get 2.
And it sounds like it's win or bust. Like, second place does not matter.
Let's assume they're playing a perfectly balanced course between open and wooded with, a very normal distribution of par 3s, 4s, and 5s. You need distance on some holes, you need accuracy on some holes, blah, blah, blah.
I pick in a perfect distribution, I would take Haley King and Owen Scoggins. And Owen feels Own feels bad to pick because I'm like, I want the win factor.
You want the
that
upside.
I feel like, oh yeah, I want the upside. But the problem is that they had a season to prove the upside, and Evelina and Henna couldn't show me the upside, right? They still couldn't get a win. It would have been one thing if they got a win and then had like an average finish of 45th. Like that would have made so much sense to me. But they couldn't even get a win. So I don't know why I wouldn't pick Own, who had more consistent performance near the top.
She was on the podium a lot. Lot.
Got to keep it
but
close.
It's hard to imagine her winning a tournament in some ways. I mean, the way that things went down. I mean, like, it's just like there's a little bit too much downside to the distance component. I think Haley King you have to choose, even if you're dealing with more inconsistency there.
Sure,
you're certainly getting could win any tournament potential. I think Henna would be my other pick. I don't know if I would take Henna or Own. It's a tough call. It's a tough call. Like, I would actually try to do some like statistical analysis of the course and be like, okay, how much is putting going to be relevant? Like,
right.
It's an interesting decision to make, but it's fair. I mean, like they didn't get the wins. I get it, but I just think that there's just too many good players to not rank them number one for me.
That's fair. That is fair.
And Discraft ends up kind of just being left out of this conversation somewhat. Paige had a great season. Missy got that win. It was a solid year for Discraft, but it just feels like it pales in comparison to the scope of the team that Innova has and the strength of Kristin and Latitude 64's here.
That's fair. All right. Do you want to do MPO then?
We're going to take a break, and then we're going to do MPO. Stay with us. We'll be right back. The Upshot is presented by Pound Disc Golf, makers of the best bags in the sport. Make sure you check out Pound's Custom Pack Builder, where you can customize every aspect of the bag, from the upper fabric, the lower fabric, the zippers, the sliders, the cords. You can get an Octothorpe, an Octahall, a toolbox, or even a Carlton in custom options. And stay tuned, Rufus Customs coming soon. Go to PoundDiscGolf.com to check out the Custom Pack Builder today. Welcome back to the Upshot. Before we move on, Josh, it's probably worth noting that for Innova, who did you expect to be their top player at the start of the year?
Evelina Salonen.
Not Haley?
I don't remember.
We didn't have a lot of data, remember? Like the Europeans, it feels like they've been around forever now that we've had this whole year, but we hadn't seen the Europeans since 2019.
No, you're right. It probably was Haley. But I had a lot of hype around Evelina.
Sure.
I know personally.
It's crazy that it was Own.
Yeah.
Career year.
Yes.
For the Masters eligible Own Scoggins.
Masters winner, mind you.
Thank you. Thank you. Keep me in my place. Just amazing control. And obviously we talked about the putting on Tuesday, just outrageous. Everybody else is chasing Own. And it's great. It's so funny to watch her putt because it looks so bad coming out of her hand. Mm-hmm. It's like whoop, 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 whoop. Chains every time.
Yeah. She's incredible. She's so much fun to watch.
All right, we're going to move on now to MPO. We remove Neptune from the list, and we add Infinite to the list. And that gets us rocking and rolling. Josh, who do you have at 10? We agree here.
We do agree. I was looking through. We agree on all but 2 teams.
Interesting.
So this one is not going to be as exciting.
But it is exciting when we talk about the overall scope and which teams finished where. I think it's pretty interesting given what we expected at the beginning of the year.
You're not going to get the heated disagreement as much between Charlie and I this time. Latitude 64 is my number 10. Your number 10 as well. Nobody in the top this kind of goes in the same place as on FPO. There are 2 manufacturers that do not have any players inside the top 25. Latitude 64 is one of them. That's why they go in the number 10. And not only do they not have one, I don't think they had, like, Emerson Keith is their top player and just wholly irrelevant this season. Lowry. Oh.
No, continue.
Oh, okay. Lauri Lehtinen is their other top player who we had a lot of hype for going into the season. And relative to other Europeans, just did not quite have. I mean, the Europeans as a whole had a pretty okay, like, fine season for coming over and getting started, and definitely were picking it up near the end. Nicholas Antila is a key example of that. But Lowry was just of the Nicholas Vino Lowry, but near the bottom of that 3. So Latitude 64 for me is the bottom.
I will note, it is interesting. Will we see Latitude return to focusing a little bit more on sponsorship here in the U.S.? This is. I don't want this to go under the radar. Seth Fendley, who is employee number 1 at the Disc Golf Pro Tour, it's been recently announced that he is leaving to basically run U.S. operations for Latitude 64. Now, this is very interesting for a number of reasons, because seeing employee number 1 from the Pro Tour leaving the Pro Tour is a little bit shocking to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, obviously, people have all kinds of reasons, and I talked to Seth. I'm not going to go into full detail about our conversation, but one of the things that he talked about was that it was just a great opportunity for him to be able to spend more time at home. He's going to be able to work out of Florida for Latitude 64, and despite expecting to travel less this year for the Pro Tour, ended up spending just as much time on the road. He said he basically wasn't home at all in July, and it was just too much of a grind, and so that's part of the reason for his decision. But you think about like a high growth startup property in pro sports like the Pro Tour. That is a massive, people who are holding chips in the Pro Tour have to be thinking, wow, like, we might be able to, cash this in someday, and make a mint. So I think it's a little disconcerting to see a very early employee leaving. But let's talk about it in the context of today's show. He's going to take over for Latitude 64, going to help do things like run the team. Like, they're going to have a team manager, which is not something that they've had at all, really. And how will that change things? I think their marketing strategy, the fact that they're trying to set up U.S. operations, they're going to try to set up having a distribution center in the U.S. so that if you want to buy specialty Latitude 64 discs, you don't have to pay $30 to ship it from Europe. These are things that Latitude fans have been very annoyed by. So that I think is very interesting for them moving forward. But as it stands right now, for me, it was a toss up for them and DGA at the bottom. I agree. I think I slightly put Latitude at the bottom just because DGA at least had the benefit of having kind of a splashy offseason. Get Andrew Marweed, and Andrew Marweed didn't really have as good a season as I thought he was going to have, considering the way that 2021 ended. And that's why they're near the bottom of this list. But at least they had a little bit of buzz, whereas Latitude, really, all the buzz came on the FPO side.
Yeah. Interesting. Emerson Keith actually finished above Andrew Marweed. It went Emerson Keith at 28 in Pro Tour standings. Emerson Keith 28, Lauri Lehtinen 29, Andrew Marweed 30. So,
there you go. I mean, I think that's a maybe a reason to pick Latitude over DGA, but it's marginal.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. So in our 8th spot, then we have MVP. When we were putting our rankings, Charlie, you said, "Do I prioritize wins or the famous guy?" Look, MVP never has to sign another player, at least for the next decade, and they still will sell plastic thanks to the famous guy. And the famous guy didn't have too bad of a season, all in all, right? 12th, not as good, but I mean, it would have been nice for him to get a couple wins. So I think it was a bit disappointing in terms of his overall performance. But the biggest problem for me is that is MVP's only MPO contender. I know there's a lot of hype around Raven Newsom. I think he dealt with injuries a lot this season, but he's it. He's the only guy in the top 25 for this team. They have no wins. And so for me, they get the 8th spot.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely still riding off the shot, you know. And they got a lot of benefit from that. Not only, of course, did they sell lots of envies, but I think they've done a good job marketing the players that they do have. You know, I think companies maybe overvalue having a lot of players at times versus having one person that you can do your marketing around. Like DGA does its marketing around Katrina, and they probably sell a lot of discs because of that. Mm-hmm. And MVP can be like, James Conrad, world champion. Sarah Hokum, world champion. Like, what? That's enough to fill your commercials. And then, you know, their sales are incredibly impressive. You know, if you go look at like top retailers like Infinite, you're going to see them up near the top of the list.
Yep.
And so I think they're doing just fine in the marketing department, although I agree with you, not their best season. James Conrad didn't quite live up to the kind of reputation of being able to go out there and snag a major win, even in the middle of an otherwise just okay season.
Here's the one thing the one thing I'll add about MVP of what I've observed. You have brands that have like cult followings, right? I think of like Castoplast as a key example there. Really, really loyal, dedicated Castoplast fans who will insist that is the best plastic ever produced. Give them credit. It's some nice plastic. But like the bigger a fan base grows, the less power or, you know, the I guess like hold that it has over those fans, right? You still have your core, but the further out you get on the fringes, the more diluted that fan base becomes. It's just somebody who throws a disc because they like it. MVP, I think, has done an incredible job of scaling up, thanks to the shot, scaling up the size of their market while still maintaining that cult following, thanks to their marketing strategies, communication, regular drops and releases of new discs. Like, the people who throw MVP, and there are a lot of them now, are just hardcore MVP fans. And that's something that I think is a unique phenomenon to MVP. And this is all based, I mean, this is anecdotal, right? I don't know this. I don't know how to run data on this. I don't know if it is for sure, but that's just how my experience feels, both in social media and interacting with players in casual rounds and on the course.
So let's move on to number 7. We both have West Side at number 7. Matt Oram, the representative for West Side, up in the top 25. And, you know, Matty O still can't get over the hump, still can't get the win. Is he the best player with no win in MPO?
Yes.
It's got to be, right? So, look, you know, there's just not enough depth there for them to go any higher. I think it was a nice move for them to sign Matty O. Matty O's fan favorite. I'd be really curious to know how much plastic he moves. But if you're an Alabama fan, you got to get some. So I don't really have much more to say about West Side.
Yep. Number 6, we both have Infinite. That is represented by Drew Gibson. Has the 1 MPO win. I mean, if you're a retailer / manufacturer who has a top 25 player like Drew Gibson who got a win, nice season. It gives you a player to stick their face on a disc to sell a signature series. You know, Infinite's got to be pretty pleased with that performance. I think Drew Gibson was irrelevant during parts of the season and just off tour on other parts, but also had some, you know, the win is a big deal. And I think Drew Gibson is one of those personalities that does draw people to his brand as well, just thanks to the way he throws, the kind of brand he's built for himself. And so Infinite's got to be pretty pleased, but with only one player here, I think 6 is probably where they top out for me.
All right, so let's move on to number 5. And we have the same number 5. And this is interesting, like, as we move through here. Is this really... I'm like double checking that I have this how I want it. And I think I do.
I do too.
I think
I
I
just
do.
did the same thing.
Innova
Yeah.
at number 5. Now they have the second most players inside the top 25. Calvin Heimberg, Joel Freeman, Anthony Barella, Nate Sexton, and Bradley Williams. They got 3 wins this year. I don't know if you can hear the sirens. It is crazy. I don't know what's going on. Like, there's been like 10 cop cars that have gone by in the last 3 minutes. 3 wins for Innova this year. Bradley Williams got one. Don't forget. Don't forget. Yeah. And then, of course, Calvin. And good depth, solid players, some fan favorites, Nate Sexton. But other teams just outshined them when it comes to either depth or wins. And I just, Calvin, as I said all year, they have to back up the truck and pay Calvin. They have to, because if they don't, they have nothing. Their star team is thin. And you look at the players, they're good. But is Bradley Williams ever going to get another win? Probably not. Anthony Barella is not super consistent. Nate Sexton is almost off the tour at this point. And Joel Freeman certainly has the talent to get a win, but he's a little bit controversial. I mean, I don't know if that's the guy that you really want to build your brand around. But what did they do? They backed up the truck and they paid him.
Yep.
So contract your Calvin got his contract.
Yes.
And but at the end of the day, I just think that the next 4 companies that we're going to talk about just simply had better seasons.
All the reasons that, when we were talking FPO, it was the case of you had the depth of Innova or the wins and the power of Kristin, or kind of the mix in Discraft. The problem is that all 5 of the top companies in MPO have the mix. They all have at least some extent of depth, a number of wins, majors, and Innova, notably, is the only one without a major or a tour championship. Every other of the top 5 have a major or the tour championship to their name. And that may have been part of that decision there, because these top 5 companies have it all. They have the complete package, as we're going to talk about. So I think that's another reason I choose to knock Innova and drop them down to the 5 spot. So without further ado, in the 4 spot, I put Prodigy. Charlie, I know you do as well.
I did. And I just before we even go on any further, let's just take a moment and think about Prodigy is ahead of Innova in our MPO rankings. After Chris Dickerson left in an acrimonious way at the beginning of this year, and everybody was writing the obituary for Prodigy. Now you could go ahead and continue.
Thank you. I almost put Prodigy in my number 3 spot. Prodigy has a major with USDGC. They have the most talented young player in the sport right now in Gannon Burr.
Oh, really? Oh, didn't you draft Isaac Robinson over Gannon Burr?
I did.
I just caught you out. You just got caught in 4K. You're done. Everybody, put the tally in my column. Gannon Burr, most talented young player in MPO.
Gannon Burr did not have a major when we did that draft. They have the 1.5 times most talented player in MPO, Isaac Robinson. But their core is a group of young guys who are friends, who play together, who give each other advice on the course, who have developed a brand of what Prodigy is right now on the MPO side that has made them incredibly popular, and they had an excellent season to back that up. Gannon Burr having the playoff at LVC to start the season, Isaac Robinson getting the win at Idlewild, and getting the compliment from Paul Macbeth, the only win that Paul Macbeth says if he had played his best could not have taken away from him. That's how good Isaac Robinson played. I still think that has to be the best compliment in the world. Is there another disc golf compliment you would rather get?
If the GOAT tells you I couldn't have beaten you, I couldn't have done it.
I couldn't have done it.
That is pretty crazy.
That's unreal. It's unreal. I still think that is the number one reason I chose Isaac Robinson pick that I did, and I still feel good with it. I'm sticking to it.
Wow, he's sticking to it, folks, after exposing himself.
Kevin Jones had a little bit of a lackluster season, but overall, Prodigy just has to be so thrilled at the way this season went, given because Kevin Jones didn't have the best season, but he's still top 10 in the Pro Tour standings. Like, he needs to play better. The problem is that he's the flagship guy, right? He was the guy who got the 4-year own disc line. He was the hype man, and then he got beat out by a couple of players this season. Needs to step it up, but all in all, Prodigy just has to look at their MPO team and be like, we are doing all right.
Yeah, now you got to make sure you hold it together. I mean,
yes,
you got to get these guys signed to extensions if you can. Just quick mulligan for you. Kevin Jones was 11th in the Pro Tour standings, not top 10. But point stands. I think that's certainly the biggest surprise for me is that, sure, we knew like, okay, Gannon Buhr, promising prospect at the beginning of the year, but I don't think anybody saw 4th on the tour finish from him. And I certainly everybody was like, okay, what's KJ going to do? He just signs this big extension, all this new plastic. He's got these discs coming out. It's a blah, blah, blah. And then he felt irrelevant this year. That's the problem with the way that his season went down, because he collected points. It's like the New York Knicks. Okay. They go out on the court and you know what? They just got back-to-back wins over the Jazz and the Nuggets, which on the road, amazing dubs.
Yeah.
That's the first win for the Knicks in Denver since 2006. So let me just hype my Knicks real quick. But the problem is, this is a team that will then go out and lay some horrible egg against a bad team, and they're good, right? They're a pretty good team. They're probably going to make the play-in, and maybe they can get to the first round of the playoffs, and that's probably about where their ceiling's at. And so they're fine, but like if you're like focusing on the top teams in the NBA, you're not talking about them. And that's what happened for Kevin Jones. He got caught in the middle. He wasn't popping up to the top as much as you need to see for a player of his caliber. Mm-hmm. He was collecting points in that middle ground. And that's fine for gathering tour points, but it didn't feel like he had a season where you were talking about him very much. Yep. I feel like we hardly talked about him the whole year. And instead, we're talking about Gannon and we're talking about Isaac. But those guys salvaged what would have been kind of a disaster offseason. I mean, imagine if they didn't, if they weren't on the team or if they just played, they were 20th on the tour or something. I mean, it would have been grim for Prodigy.
Yes. Instead,
but they salvaged, and even Alden Harris, he was popping off at Silver Series, and people love the YouTube. I mean, I feel like it was just an amazingly successful year for Prodigy, considering how bad we thought it was going to be when we started the season.
Yep, I agree.
Okay,
we now have reached our 1 point of difference.
Yes, here we go.
In my number 3 spot, I've got Discraft.
And I have Didi.
I went back and forth on this one a lot. Discraft has, and I think this goes back to kind of the depth that you're talking about, right? Macbeth, Dickerson, Corey Ellis, Adam Hammis, Aaron Gossage, Ezra Aderhold. Dynamic Discs has Ricky, Chris Clemens, and Mason Ford. I've gone back and forth on this one a lot since we've even started talking MPO, because I have not.
Well, I mean, let's look at the wins. 3 wins for Discraft.
Yep.
They got 2 majors in the mix there. Champions Cup for Chris Dickerson and Worlds for Paul. Didi, 6 wins. Wysocki winning the Tour Championship, along with a lot of Elite Series tournaments. 5 wins. I'm sorry. 5 wins.
5 wins.
I can't read. 5 wins. 4 Elite Series for Rick, and then the Tour Championship. So more wins. And Chris Clemens had a really nice year. Sneaky good year. And Mason Ford as well in the top 25. So there's a case to be made for both. Make your case for why you have DD over Discraft.
Number 1, I mean, Ricky is the player of the year. He's back-to-back player of the year. He is accumulating wins in an era when we said it would be incredibly difficult to accumulate wins the way that Ricky did this season. That is And to boot, Ricky's an incredibly popular player. He has an enormous fan base that he brought over with him from Innova that reinvigorated and bolstered a dynamic discs team that we said had to make a splashy signing last offseason or risk falling into irrelevance in the MPO sponsorship game. And they did it. And they hit it out of the park. And of the available people to sign, I don't think they could have asked for a better signing and a better result for how this season went with their new flagship player. I think they sold well above what they would have sold otherwise. Like in Ricky discs, I think they sold more. They easily earned back the amount of money they paid Ricky in sales. Do you not think so?
I mean, I have a hard time assessing that, but
That's
probably.
I mean, I would hope so. Because if not, then I don't think you should be paying anybody but Macbeth $1 million a year. Because
that's right.
Ricky sold a lot of plastic. He had a lot of signature discs. He was relevant for the entire season. And while we do reward majors, and I this is just so close to me, I really think that DD probably had the better season.
All right. Well, I got more wins. I mean, I'll give him that, but Ricky's not enough to overcome what Discraft had, which was actual majors, 2 actual majors, not a tour championship. And just a much more relevant overall team. This is a depth victory for me. You have Macbeth and Dickerson. Now, Chris Dickerson underperformed a little bit this year, but he still won a major. But, Corey Ellis was relevant for a big stretch of the season. Aaron Gossage was super relevant for a big chunk of the season. Ezra Aderhold, popular on social media. That's a minor point. I'm not trying to count social media stuff here. Adam Ham is in the mix as well. So I just think DD needed a little more from some of its other players, and they just don't have enough to overcome Discraft's lead in the volume department. Because, we were talking about Corey Ellis and Aaron Gossage a lot this year, along with, of course, Macbeth. And they won the Worlds. They got 2 majors. I just think that, overall, that the team is stronger. The team is stronger and had a stronger overall season, when you go beyond just the win count.
Even as we're talking about it, I think I agree with a lot of the things you're saying. I'm sticking with my rankings, but it's just so razor thin to me. You make a good case.
Let's go to number 1. We agree, consensus number 1. And honestly, I really did not see this coming. It is Discmania. Here are their players in order of their finish in our composite world rankings at the end of the season. Simon Lizotte, Kyle Klein, Eagle McMahon, Nicholas Antila. Of those players, the only one you could even remotely argue had I don't know. We have to deal with the fact that there's the injury for Eagle. Kyle Klein had a horrible start to the year.
Yep.
There's no doubt. He was playing bad. But he really brought it back. And he surged all the way up past Eagle in the rankings. Now, obviously, Eagle was knocked down way more than he would have been had he been playing. But Eagle salvages the entire year by winning the most impressive tournament of the season, outdueling Macbeth at European Open. I mean, if that didn't happen, I feel like Discmania's shine would have been way lower, and maybe they don't finish ahead of either DD or Discraft. But the fact that he won that, and Simon had this monster resurgent year with 4 wins. 4 wins! You just have to give them the nod.
Yes.
And Nicholas Antila was the most exciting European player probably in MPO.
Only European in our composite rankings, not named Simon.
There you go.
So the other thing I want to add is when you look at, if I had told you at the beginning of the season, Eagle is going to play all of 5 tournaments, predict where in our top 10 you would put Discmania. right?
Oh,
like if I say that to you at the beginning of the season, that you know nothing else, all I say to you is Eagle's going to play 5 events, and then he's going to be out the rest of the season with an injury.
I would definitely have expected them to be behind Innova, behind Discraft, behind DD, and possibly even behind MVP. And I don't know about Prodigy.
Maybe Prodigy. Depends on how much credit you give Kevin Jones, but I think Kyle Klein's enough to overcome that. So,
I mean, remember that Simon has basically not been a relevant player. He's not been a top 25 player since like 2019.
Yeah, long time. And for them to come out, have tied for the most wins on tour, take down the most exciting major and one of the most exciting tournaments, I guess, since Worlds last year. Long time if you don't count Worlds.
Of the last 365 days.
No, I don't think it was. Was it even?
It was.
Yeah,
it was a little more.
Worlds was in June.
It was in June, yeah.
So the most exciting tournament of the year.
Yep.
And to do it with the Crush Boys as your feature lineup, like Discmania just has to be so thrilled. They must have made so much money on these guys. They have the most popular players on tour. The most liked and beloved figures in disc golf are like featured in this lineup. And they have an excellent branding to go around with it and an amazing season to go with it as well. I don't know what more you would want if you are a manufacturer out of your team.
Discmania's strategy of trying to sign and retain high upside players and not focus on adding a ton of depth, I think is working extremely well.
Yeah.
And of course, having Simon get back to the top has got to be a huge W for them. I mean, I don't know that they could have predicted that, but of course we all know that Simon's one of the most talented players ever to put a disc in his hand. But yeah, remarkable. I mean, I don't think I would have even predicted this after 2 Simon wins. This came together late because he just kept winning.
Yeah. And then Nicholas Ontala's run at USDGC,
100%.
They almost took down 2 of the most exciting majors at this season.
It was something else, man. It's remarkable to me that they end up getting the top spot here, but I don't think you can really argue against it.
Yeah.
I guess, like, I don't know, their depth is matching everybody except Discraft. They have more wins than Discraft, and they have significantly more depth than Dynamic Discs.
Mm-hmm.
So, and keep in mind, again, Eagle had an underperformance this year relative to what you would have expected coming into the year. I mean, who in the world would have predicted that Simon would be the higher ranked player at the end of this year?
And if you raised your hand, you're lying.
You're lying. Nobody saw it coming.
Nobody.
And I think that the surprise factor adds to the intrigue.
Yeah.
And just to, and even, like I said, even Kyle Klein brought it back from kind of looking bad. He ended up having a very solid season. Where did he finish in the
finished in 9th. I mixed up with Kevin Jones, but you ready for this stretch? Preserve 3rd, Idlewild 3rd, Great Lakes Open 6th, Mid-America Open 5th, Ledgestone 7th, Des Moines tied 7th. I mean, that is 6 tournaments in a row he finished inside the top 10.
Yeah. 6th again at MVP Open. Didn't play great at the majors this year. And again, you just had a super slow start. It was finishing in the mid-20s a bunch, but really young player, still obviously has tons of talent, and I think we could see him take steps forward again in the upcoming season. He's going to be on my list of players to watch in 2023. That's for sure.
That's without a doubt.
Any wrap-up thoughts here, Josh?
I think it was an exciting season. I think it's going to be really interesting for the teams that have the most depth of young players, namely Prodigy on MPO and Innova on FPO, to see who they're able to retain. Because if Latitude 64 is reaching out, trying to get trying to get their players, if Prodigy is trying to get FPO players, if whoever's shopping, trying to get some additional support to their team, those are the ones where they're going to be looking, where there's just too much, and probably, there are a couple over in MPO as well that could be pulled. There's a lot of depth on some of these teams that we see it in professional sports all over. When teams have this much incredible depth, you can't pay them all.
Dare I say what I'm about to say?
I don't know. What are you going to say?
I think we're going to have a quiet hot stove season.
I think you're right.
But I said this last year.
We need to do. We're going to do.
To be fair, last year I still have to give myself a little bit of a pass because everybody broke their contracts. I didn't expect that legal contracts were going to just be put through the paper shredder and nobody would do anything about it. But that is what happened. I looked through the list of these players in the top 25. Here's the thing. The biggest risk is for Team Innova, who typically signs players to 1-year contracts. So could we see some of those players bounce? Are the European women up for renewal? I think so. And so do we see Evelina or Hannah go somewhere else? You could definitely imagine them wanting a change of scenery, and you could definitely imagine other companies wanting to take a shot with one of them.
Yeah.
Like a Discmania? I mean, it would make a lot of sense. A Latitude would make a lot of sense.
Yes, it would. Man, could you imagine if Latitude had Kristin and other...
Even Prodigy, Think about, we just had this great conversation yesterday with Sepapayu about how much they focus on, the European market and in Finland in particular. To get a Finnish top FPO player on the squad would make a lot of sense.
It would make a lot of sense.
So that's where I look first. But it's hard to see a lot of other big movements happen, especially with the biggest, most obvious free agent in Calvin Heimberg off the board.
Yep. But Lone Star says they're signing a big name. I'm curious to hear who it is.
They say they got multiple players coming their way, but I don't know. Though I feels like it's going to be more like in the mid tier, not in the top tier.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens. Going to be fun. And with Innova stuff, typically though, you don't find out anything until January 1st.
Yep.
Because they're pretty hardcore about you are under contract until December
January
31st.
1. Yeah. Yep.
So don't expect. I mean, maybe we'll start to get some little rumors here and there, but Innova already locked up Calvin for the long term. So who else walks that you're like, wow, that's crazy? I don't know. Sexton's not going anywhere. I mean, Joel Freeman,
maybe.
I would be intrigued. Could we see AB go to Lone Star? Is that possible?
Maybe.
Be an interesting one. We'll see what happens.
Curious. I'm curious. I need to look at the Discraft players: Ellis, Hammis, Gossage, and Aderhold.
Yep.
I think those would be a good signing for Lone Star. Any one of those four.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to see some shuffling of the cards on those sort of like second tier players.
Yeah.
Who have an opportunity to go get paid more, basically, to switch to a company that is going to be able to do more marketing around them. Because look, I mean, the marketing for Discraft is going to Paul and to Chris. Yes. And I'm really curious to see what happens with Brody Smith, by the way. His contract's up. So will we see him stick around Discraft, or is he going to make a move? Making a move tends to be good for the bottom line for the company and the player. Just remember what happened when Paul made the move. He's made a lot more money because of that. And not just because he's getting paid more by Discraft, but because it was such a shocker that everybody was like, I got to go buy his discs now. And Discraft was so smart. They started the trend of focusing around the player and making discs for the player. And that now is commonplace, but that's because Discraft is just make zillions.
Yep.
So that's going to do it for today's show. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back with you next week right here on The Upshot.